Wars do not begin with gunfire. Not anymore. They begin with liquidity crises, with frozen reserves and collapsing currencies. They begin on screens, not battlefields, and by the time the first missile is launched, the financial war has already been lost. History does not predict the future, but it does expose its pattern. And every indicator from debt levels to resource scarcity is flashing red. 2026 may not start with an invasion, but it could end with one, and it will all begin with money. We are taught that World War I began with an assassination, that World War II began with an invasion. But history is rarely that simple, behind the headlines and battle maps. Both wars followed years of quiet, compounding financial pressure, the kind that builds slowly until it snaps. In 1914, the British Empire was drowning in debt. Germany was rising fast, yet denied access to global markets. The gold supply was gated. Credit was weaponized. And when economic channels closed, military ones opened, it was not just about empire. It was about who could afford to survive and who was being pushed out of the system designed by someone else. The same story repeated in 1939. Trade collapsed, currencies failed, and Germany, stuck in the ruins of post-war debt and hyperinflation, turned to conquest as a last resort. War justified what finance could no longer achieve. Now it is 2026. The system looks different, but the signals, they are terrifyingly the same. Debt at unprecedented levels, global trade destabilizing, major currencies losing trust. Financial alliances fraying, and once again, an old hegemon, the United States, is trying to contain a rising power. China, not with armies, but with economic restrictions in every great conflict. The bullet is the last thing that happens. What comes before is always economic isolation, default risk, inaccessible markets, spiraling debt, and a sense that waiting any longer will collapse everything from within. We do not have to guess. We have the map, and history has already drawn it. The world owes more than $315 trillion, 3 times the total value of everything it produces each year. This is not a temporary imbalance. It is a structural one. The largest borrowers are not households or corporations. They are governments. The United States owes over $34 trillion. Japan's debt exceeds 250% of its GDP. Europe is buried under obligations it cannot reduce without uprooting entire economies. But here is the trap. Governments cannot really go bankrupt. When a business becomes insolvent, it shuts down. When a government cannot pay its bills, it is forced to make a choice, and history only leaves 3 options. 1. Austerity. Cut spending, raise taxes, and accept political collapse from the inside. 2. Default. Destroy global credit, crush trust, and risk system-wide failure. 3. Inflate and distract. Print money, pass the damage to citizens, and look for a foreign enemy to blame. Time and time again, leaders have chosen the third, because war makes everything justifiable. Emergency printing. Justified currency control. Justified debt cancellation. Only when it is owed to an adversary. In 2026, a wall of sovereign and corporate debt comes due. Loans that were created at near 0% interest during the pandemic will need to be refinanced at 5%, 6%, or more. Many companies will not survive it. Entire governments will struggle, and the debt does not disappear, it reshuffles. But trust in the system does not survive reshuffling forever. And when populations lose faith in money, leaders look for power somewhere else. They reach beyond borders. To regain control, debt may not fire the first shot, but it takes aim years before the world notices. For decades, the US dollar was the foundation of global trade. It was not just a currency, it was infrastructure. Everyone used it. Everyone trusted it. Not because they loved the United States, but because they believed in neutrality. That era ended in 2022, when the US and its allies froze Russia's central bank assets, hundreds of billions in reserves, sent a message more powerful than any headline. Your money can disappear, not because you stole, but because you disagreed, for countries like China, India, Saudi Arabia, and Brazil. That moment was a turning point, because if Russia's savings were not safe, then no one's were. Nations realized that the dollar was not just a medium of exchange, it had become a financial weapon, one that could be fired silently and without warning. From that point on, the world began quietly building alternatives. China accelerated development of CIPs, a global payment system designed to bypass SWIFT. Russia began trading oil in rubles and yuan. BRICS countries increased their gold reserves faster than at any point since World War II. But attempts to escape the dollar are not transitions. They are acts of economic defiance. And Western sanctions, while nonviolent in form, operate like siege warfare. They deny access to food, to medicine, to fuel, to investment, and history is clear. When you starve a nation long enough, war becomes a rational response. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor not out of arrogance, but because U.S. sanctions cut off its oil. It was a financial suffocation, and it forced a military retaliation. The danger of a weaponized dollar is not that it fails, it is that it works too well, and eventually forces an opponent to strike back. While the United States struggles with rising debt and slowing influence, China faces something that may be even more dangerous: internal collapse. Its once miraculous economy is faltering. The property sector is crumbling. Youth unemployment has surged to historic levels. Its population is declining faster than any major nation in modern history. China's growth engine built on real estate, exports, and cheap labor is broken, and the Communist Party knows it. That matters more than most people think. Because in China, economic performance is tied directly to political legitimacy. Prosperity is not just a goal, it is the glue holding the system together. When that prosperity fades, something else must replace it. That something is nationalism, and Taiwan is its most powerful symbol. Military analysts have long warned of a convergence window in 2026. By that year, the U.S. will still be modernizing its navy and shifting focus toward the Indo-Pacific, but not yet ready. At the same time, China's military buildup will reach a temporary peak. Meanwhile, both economies will likely be under enormous stress. Corporate defaults in the West. Property collapses in the East if China believes its internal window is closing, and if it believes war can unite the country before unrest takes hold. 2026 becomes not just an opportunity, but a necessity. A blockade of Taiwan could begin not out of confidence, but out of fear. It is the logic of the peaking power strike before you decline. Force the world to accept your strength before it starts to fade. This is not ideology, it is timing. Trade is built on trust. Trust that what you send will be paid for. Trust that the currency exchanged will hold value. Trust that contracts will be honored, not frozen, blocked, or defaulted, but that trust is breaking. And when trade stops working, history shows one thing always comes next: tanks. The global economy is dividing into blocks. The West, led by the United States, Europe, and Japan. The East, driven by China, Russia, and emerging allies like Iran and Brazil. Both sides are assembling separate supply chains, separate financial systems, even separate internets. The facade of cooperation still exists in markets, but under the surface, the gears of decoupling are grinding fast at the same time. We are entering a period of real-world resource scarcity. Energy is tightening. Oil production has plateaued. Critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, copper are in short supply, needed for everything from EVs to weapons to green infrastructure. The dollar once allowed the U.S. to trade paper for energy. But if the East no longer accepts that paper, then access must be earned or taken. And this is where collapse meets confrontation. If China cannot buy the oil it needs using yuan, or if the U.S. cannot access semiconductors made in Asia, the logic of markets gives way to the logic of force. You no longer negotiate price, you secure routes, you seize wells. You protect what you have and strike before others do. 2026 is not just a financial deadline. It could be the year that trade finally gives way to territorial defense. And once that shift happens, global economics becomes a battlefield. When systems are stretched too far, collapse is not a question of if, only a question of what gives first. For decades, global peace has rested on the illusion of financial stability, but 2026 threatens to expose that illusion. The debt cannot be paid. The trust cannot be repaired. The economy cannot endlessly inflate its way out of consequence. So something has to break. In past eras, it was the currency, the trust. Eventually, the borders, and when the wealth disappears, when the paper burns and the numbers on the screen stop meaning what they used to, the pressure turns inward first. Then it aims outward, because war is not the opposite of finance. War is what nations use to fix finance when everything else has failed. It suspends the rules, it resets the board. It rallies the people. The question is not whether war can be avoided. The question is whether the economic system, as it stands, can absorb what is coming. History suggests it cannot. Empires default, militarize, then strike. It happened in 1914. It happened in 1939. And everything set in motion for 2026 is following that map. The system is cracking. Nations are arming, and the clock is running out.